Welcome. I'm Debra Ann Clement, and thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Shortcut to the Soul. Today, I want to talk about chart interpretation, and in particular, I want to talk about interpreting the chart ruler. So, for any of you who might be new, not too sure about what the chart ruler is, the chart ruler is the planet that rules the ascendant. So, let's say you've got Pisces rising. Well, Neptune rules Pisces, so Neptune is the chart ruler. When we're looking at a chart, right, the sun is important, the moon is important, right? The planets are important, the rising sign is important. That's what we hear a lot about, the sun, the moon, the rising sign, the big three. And I'm not knocking that, okay? But I'm going to be honest with you. When I sit down with a chart, right, I've got a chart in front of me, let's say I've got a new client, the very first planet I go to is the chart ruler. That is the first thing. What is that planet? What sign is it in? What is it? Where is it located? What is its condition? And what are the aspects? That alone gives me so much information about the individual, right? The person or the soul, let's say, connected to the chart. So again, I'm not taking away from any of the planets, but I just feel that the chart ruler is just really underrated, the information that you can get from the chart ruler. And I've often said, many of you have heard me say this, if I had to go to a meeting, I had to sit down across from someone at the table and negotiate, and I could only know one planet, right, one placement, I would choose the moon. And that's true. I would want to know about the moon sign because that tells me, what does this person need to feel secure? But if I'm interpreting a chart, and especially if I have to do a quick chart interpretation, I go right to that chart ruler. And so I want to talk about it because the rising sign, we say it's one's approach to life. And, right, so that's the ascendant, the sign will say on the first house. And the first house, of course, does take in the physical body. But for me, when I look at the chart ruler, to me, that's the individual, more so than the sun, to be honest. All right. Now, that's just my own take on it. That's the way I've practiced, quite frankly, for all these years. It's not anything that I was taught. It's just something, that I just started doing, seems like ages ago now. And I wanted to share it because, well, to be honest, obviously I've been doing something right, but it does give so much information. And again, it's not really appreciated. So I want to do sort of a mini lesson about chart rulers to give you an idea of what I mean, to give you some examples. And this way, maybe when you're sitting down interpreting charts, especially, your friends, your family, especially those of you who I know are really practicing and want to be professional, give it a try and see if it works for you. So let's just say, for example, that Aries, let's start with Aries. Aries is a rising sign. So right off the bat, when you see Aries rising, you think about the approach to life. Aries is a cardinal sign, right? Initiative, leading. Oh, Aries, it's daring, it's assertive. And so basically the approach to life would be someone who engages in life, who'll go after things. Usually there's ambition there, right? Okay, so that's great. Let's look at the planet. So the planet that rules Aries is Mars. So Mars is a chart ruler. The first thing you look at is, hey, what sign is Mars in? So think about this. There's a big difference, right? The way, when it comes to the expression of a planet, there's a big difference between Mars in Aries, Mars in Capricorn, and Mars in Pisces, or Mars in Libra. So if you are looking at the planet in the sign, that you may want to consider Ptolemy's tables of dignities and debilities. There are other tables and different systems as well, but you may want to consider the planet. Is it dignified? Is it exalted? Is it in its detriment? Is it in its fall? And you can consider those or not. But really, I want to say, just take that planet, I'm going to use Mars as an example, and consider the expression as a person, as an individual. How does this Mars and Aries person, let's say, express, or how does a person being represented by Mars in Pisces express themselves? All right. Think about those qualities. Think about, if you're starting out, think about the keywords of Mars and the keywords, quite frankly, of Pisces. If, look it up in a book. I'm not kidding. I mean, you all have to start right to learn somewhere. But think about that and apply it to an individual. Now, the condition of the planet, and that to me, I'm not making light of the planet and the sign, but the condition of planets tends to be overlooked as well. So, is the planet retrograde? That's going to make a difference to its expression. Is it intercepted? That makes quite a difference as well. And so, whatever, and I hate to sort of say I don't care what planet it is, or rather I should say I don't care what sign it is. Actually I don't care what planet it is either. If the chart ruler is retrograde, and just remember, the sun and the moon, they can never be retrograde, right? They can never be retrograde. They're the luminaries. But no matter what planet, no matter what sign, if the chart ruler is retrograde, that is affecting that individual, okay? Across the board, all areas of the person's life. Because if you have a planet ruling of the house of money, let's say the second house, and it's retrograde, well, sure, that influence carries over to the second house. But if your chart ruler, and like I say, from my perspective, the planet that represents, hey, you and your life and your approach to life is retrograde, that influence is going to be a lot stronger, okay, more pervasive in your life. Now, what about if it's intercepted? It's going to be, I hate to say the same thing, but absolutely, because it's connected to you personally. So, intercepted planets, I'm just going to say this, my opinion, they're not weak. I do not look at intercepted planets and think, wow, Mars in Aries is intercepted. Wow, now that Mars in Aries is weak. No, not at all. It's frustrated. That I will say, I do feel intercepted planets are frustrated. And so the interpretation of whatever planet it is in the sign is being intercepted is going again to the person's going to experience that in much broader ways than they would just connected to, let's say, Mars in connection just to anger, to action, or the house areas. And let's see, retrograde, interception, where do I want to go next? Oh, okay. Let's talk about houses, because placement is next. And so here I'm going to get more detailed. So you have to consider, right, the planet, the sign, and the condition. And then you look at the house. And because when you put it all together, you're going to get a profile of the individual. And so let's start talking about the houses. And let's say the chart ruler is in the first house. And I'm going to say here, I really don't care what the planet is. And I really mean that. If the chart ruler is in the first house, it does tell me that right off the bat, this individual has a very strong sense of self-awareness. Now, the planet is going to make a difference, certainly, and the aspects to it will make a difference. But what it will tell me is that this is someone who is very much aware of what's going on and how whatever circumstances or conditions are going on, how it affects them directly. If it happens to be, the sun in the first house, they'd be great at, let's say, promoting themselves as well. And if Pluto happens to be the planet, there's probably a very strong sense of, I'll say, self-preservation. Okay, just a little tidbit there. But what about the second house? If the chart ruler is in the second house, the person, I'm going to say they're value conscious. Now, value conscious in the sense that there is very often the person has a strong interest or there's an emphasis in their life that is connected to money, to resources. But also, second house is self-esteem, right? We talk about values and how much we value ourselves. So when you've got a chart ruler in the second house, again, you can think to finances, you can think to self-esteem. The rest of it's going to really be fleshed out in terms of how it's expressed, all right? By all means, from the aspects. I don't want to diminish the aspects. But right off the bat, if I see a chart ruler in the second house, that will lead me to other areas. I guess that's what I really should have said earlier. That to me is the starting point. So if I see that chart ruler in the second house and I know there's money, there's something connected, and it may be that the person is very driven to make money, okay, to earn money. It may turn out it's a karmic issue with money. It may turn out they have, when I say, right, we say money issues, they could hoard things. They could, have a spending addiction. Then again, it could be connected to self-esteem, where there just might be issues connected to self-esteem. Or we don't see this too often with the second house, but quite frankly, they could also, overvalue themselves, be a little full of themselves. Third house, excuse me. Chart ruler in the third house, person is a communicator. Okay, they've got to express themselves. They've got to express their opinions. They might be expressing them in their mind, depending to the aspects to the chart ruler and which planet it is. Some are going to be a little bit more gabby, a little more chatty than others. For example, if the chart ruler, let's say there's a big difference having Jupiter in the third house of communications, right, as opposed to having Saturn. Very different expression. And it doesn't mean necessarily that someone with a chart ruler of Saturn in the third house doesn't express themselves. And they probably do, and they do so with authority, say what they mean what they say. But it's going to be very different from that Jupiter energy, which is much more outgoing, and, sometimes might even have a little bit of verbal diarrhea going on there. Now, third house is also siblings. It's just all the side-by-side relationships, siblings, cousins, right? Neighbors. And so if the chart ruler is in the third house, there may be some type of a connection. Siblings may have a strong role in the life. Yeah, that's a possibility. Tends to be more connected to communications as well as talents. Third house, chart rule in the third house, very often there's a talent for communications. And it could be speaking, it could be teaching, it could be writing. It does tell me something else. So chart rule in the third house, learning. Okay, people, whoever the person is, there's a focus on learning. Doesn't mean that they are a teacher or that they're constantly in school. We think of the third house as lower education, but it is still a house of education. It's the house, right? It's the house of the mind. So just thinking now, I know what I want to think of. I'm sorry. Chart ruler in the third house, networking. People who network. And again, how they do it and how much, whether they like it or not, of course, is going to depend on the planet, and the sign and the condition. But if the chart ruler is in the fourth house, if I see that, interesting, because it tells me a few things. Very often the person is a little bit, sometimes they prefer to stay under the radar. Doesn't mean that they're an introvert. Not that there's really, anything wrong with that. Really, we're not supposed to be everybody like an extrovert. But it does tell me very often that they are introspective. They do value security, having roots, whether it's owning a home, having roots, or having a tribe, right? It could be literally their family, but there's a strong connection there. They might just be very protective of their family. And when I want to say that there's an emphasis on family, because family and tribe, because it could be a great experience. They love their family. And like I always say about the fourth house, right? Ties that bind, ties that strangle. And so depending on that planet, what the chart ruler is, depending on those aspects, it may tell, it can tell a really happy story. It can tell, unfortunately, a pretty miserable story. But that fourth house, having that chart rule in the fourth house, I know that these areas are very, they're key to this person's personality, having influence on them their entire life. And if it tells I hate to say a sad story, doesn't mean that they are sad their whole life. But it'll tell me, though, if that story is there, it's probably connected to some type of a lesson that they are here to learn, because we do, especially parents, we choose our family, we choose our parents. So a chart ruler in the fourth house, it usually is connected to some type of a lesson. And so, fourth house, it's also property. So just want to mention that. And so it does sort of go with the security, but in terms of, like I say, having a home or putting down roots, if not an actual home. Fifth house. If the chart ruler is in the fifth house, and yes, it depends on the planet, but for the most part, the person knows how to have fun. They really do, especially if it's the sun or Mars. It's like, wow, they know how to party. If it's Saturn, let me just give you an example here. Saturn is a different story. they usually are very gifted. They can be very creative. They have talent. But if I see someone with a chart rule in the 5th house, what it tells me is they probably grew up fast. They had a lot of responsibility at a young age. And so the 5th house, we talk about creative self-expression, right? And it's also the house of children, and it's the house of romance. So much will depend as well upon the planet, right? But at the end of the day, whatever the planet is, it's in the 5th house. 5th house matters are a strong influence on this person, whether it's, and let's just say it's the sun, and they're creative, or they teach, and I don't want to say it's easy because it depends on the aspects, but let's just pretend for the moment it is. Or let's say it's Pluto or Mars. Well, it may be expressing that, you know what, in the 5th house, seeing a chart ruler in the 5th and it's Mars or Pluto, one of the things it usually tells me is that person on a physical level, they're physically strong. They can have a power of endurance, especially there with Pluto, and maybe physical, maybe an athlete, but it's usually somebody who is active physically. Could be an adrenaline junkie, all right? Doesn't mean they're all athletes, but there's usually this strong stamina. And it's passion. If nothing else, the chart ruler in the 5th house tells me that this person has passion. What are they passionate about? Well, go through the laundry list of 5th house areas, and it may be there. It may be come out through a connection, through an aspect, but they've got passion. Now, the 6th house. So when I see the chart ruler in the 6th house, and I am going to say, I don't think it's the easiest place sometimes for the chart ruler. It depends on the rest of the chart, because when the chart ruler is in the 6th house, there's a need for this person to be of service. So depending on how they accomplish this, and that's where it comes in. If they do it professionally, they're doing it as a volunteer, the boundaries are good, it's fine. However, if they're not of service in what I call a healthy way, then they will tend to bring in people or circumstances in their life where they're putting out fires, they're on the phone at all hours, taking care of other people's problems, okay? But what it also tells me about the chart ruler in the 6th house, person's usually very good in a supporting role. They don't always like the limelight. Again, the rest of the chart can modify that a bit. And if the chart ruler is in the 6th and the rest of the chart talks about being in the spotlight, they usually have to work to get there. And health conscious. Chart ruler being in the 6th house, there is a strong connection to the person, work and or health. I mean, it could also be pets. But depending on the planet, will also give you that's where I'm going to say it gives you information, because if it's Saturn, for example, or Pluto in the 6th house, well, if it's work, it can tell me that they're workaholics. All right. Saturn can be connected to where health may be an issue in the person's life. And if it's Jupiter or the moon, all right, let's talk about different planets, Jupiter or the moon, the person tells me Jupiter or the moon or the sun in the 6th house, they're a caretaker. All right. On some level, this person is a caretaker. And it might just be at work. This is a person who helps everybody else. Oh, well, you need help. I'll help you finish up your work, besides just, taking care of other obligations, but they're caretakers. The 7th house. So 7th house, when the chart ruler is in the 7th house, relationships, okay, strong theme, let's say, in the person's life, connected to that individual. They're relationship oriented. They're important. Now, again, 7th house, it's partnership. It's our best friends, right? It's our business partners and, marriage partners. It's also our adversaries. It's the house of marriage. It's the house of divorce. It's the house where people, right, we sue each other. So when the chart ruler is in the 7th house, these areas are prominent in the person's life. Now, chart ruler in the 7th sometimes it usually does tend to be a little bit more extroverted, not, quite honestly, and friendly. But the thing about the chart ruler in the 7th house, the aspects do become very important. as well as a planet. And here I'm going to say certainly as well as a planet. And here's the difference where I will say, Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter, person with the chart rule of Sagittarius rising, Jupiter in the 7th. If Jupiter is well, good condition, well aspected, they can attract people very easily. 7th house is also clients. If Saturn's in the 7th house, relationships, hey, Saturn's where we feel a little bit less than. So relationships can be, I'm going to say they're hard to come by, but there's a lot of effort put into them. And that's usually a little bit of, in some way, shape, or form, sometimes there's a little bit of I hate to use the word struggle, but I am going to use that word speaking as somebody who has Saturn in the 7th house. Now, the 8th house, if the chart ruler is in the 8th house, what does it tell me immediately about that person? It tells me that no matter how sociable they may be, no matter how friendly that they are, there is something, they don't share everything. Okay, they can seem like the most social person, have lots of, a lot of friends, and like I say, just be very open about their lives. But I'm going to tell you, they do not share everything. There's always some part of the life that they keep that's very private. Now, the 8th house, having the chart rule in the 8th house, it also tells me that person's intuitive. Okay, there's a gift there. Does it depend on the planet? Yes, in terms of how it's going to express itself, but it's usually a gift, a psychic gift, an intuitive gift, a healing gift. And when you're talking about here, I'm going to say Saturn, even Saturn in the 8th house, it doesn't deny the gift. It really doesn't. But very often Saturn in the 8th can sort of be, the person doubts it. I'll put it that way. But I do know if I see that chart rule in the 8th house, I know that there's absolutely a gift there as well. 8th house is also very much about money, right? It's a house, we say, other people's resources. But it, like the 2nd house, it's a house of resources. And so I am going to say to you, but it's a little different because the 2nd house is ruled by Taurus in the natural zodiac. And so that 2nd house money is very productive. It's like, hey, I work for it. The 8th house is Scorpio. And I like to think of that a little bit more as, I don't want to say smart money, but it's right. I'm not going to use my money. I'll use investors' money. And so anyone with the chart ruler in the 8th house, they're resourceful. It's the house of transformation. They're survivors. 9th house. I see the chart ruler in the 9th house, and I know that this person is an eternal student. This is someone who is always learning. Now, they may be in school, they may be academics, they may not be. If Uranus is the chart ruler in the 9th house, they're probably self-taught. And if they did go to school, they're probably started and stopped at times. If it's Saturn or the Sun, they may probably be academics, and very often there will be advanced degrees. 9th house, chart ruler in the 9th house, there's a sense of wanderlust. Okay? There's a sense of wanderlust. Even if it's just in their mind, but if they can get out and travel and explore, anyone with a chart ruler in the 9th house usually has, I was going to say a lot of travel guides. I'm thinking back to the old days when we used to get them in the mail. But there is this sense certainly of wanderlust and this constant interest in growing, in learning, in expanding. Now, the chart ruler in the 10th house, right off the bat, what does that say to me? Again, do not even care what planet it is. It tells me this person is ambitious. They're goal-oriented. 10th house, it's the most public house in the horoscope, right? That's what everyone sees. And we say it's a house of fame and honors. It's our reputation, personal and professional. It's our status. Chart ruler in the 10th house, that person is status conscious. Now, I'm not saying, they're a social climber. They might be. But what it tells me is that they just are very aware of their status as well as everybody else's status. They are aware of appearances, of public appearances. And the 10th house is about authority. Chart rulers in the 10th house, that person, okay, even if they don't admit it publicly, they want to be an authority, okay? And let me think. 11th house, right? Sorry. Okay, the 11th house. If I see the chart ruler in the 11th house, it's interesting because in my mind, I always say this is a person, very often they're a joiner. They like groups. They're comfortable in groups. And It could be a community activity. It could be a meetup group. It may not be a physical group. It might be a virtual group. But if they are not literally involved in groups and committees and things of that nature, I mean, they could be in a union, for example. They usually are interested in a cause. Okay, it could be political, could be environmental, some type of a cause. But the point is that if they're not actually sort of hands-on, getting their hands dirty, so to speak, in it, it's something that they're interested in. They read up on it. They might write out a check, let's say, and make a contribution to it. But there is a very strong social consciousness. Yeah, consciousness. And so that's what I'm going to say. Chart ruler in the 11th, they do see very much in a way, when I say the big picture, the greater good. They're very much, very strong awareness. Usually there's some interest on some level. There's just some interest in making something or some place or the world a little bit better. And, finally, when the chart ruler is in the 12th house. Now, it's not the same as having a sun in the 12th house. So I just want to say that straight out. When the chart ruler is in the 12th house, I am going to say it's a person usually intuitive or creative. Yes. Chart ruler in the 4th house, tends to be, intuitive as well. Just mention that for the moment. But the thing about the chart ruler in the 12th house is while it could be someone who also, and I will say similar to the sun in the 12th here, kind of hides their light under a barrel. It's not the same, because here's the thing. The sun is your identity, and the sun needs to shine in terms of, the identity. And whereas, your ascendant is your approach to life. And to me, like I say, the chart ruler represents you. And when it's in the 12th house, to me, it tells me that somebody who could be very comfortable being behind the scenes, prefers working behind the scenes, not necessarily because it's like, oh, I'm shy, oh, I'm nervous, oh, I'm afraid to, I'm not ready to come out from behind the curtain. It's someone sometimes who's very comfortable having, and I'm going to use, it's interesting because I'm going to say power here. And I know the 12th house is associated with being a victim, and surrender. But when you're talking about the chart ruler and you're in the 12th house is also the house, Neptune, can be manipulative, right? And because we don't really see it's shadows and what's going on. And so I'm not saying that if I see the ruler of the 1st and the 12th, that I'm necessarily thinking, a puppet master. But I know it's somebody who can be very comfortable with authority behind the scenes. some people want to, if I joke, if the chart ruler is in the 10th house, the person may want to lead the parade. The chart ruler is in the 12th house, they're okay with just sort of, maybe giving permission for the parade. And so a chart ruler, in the 12th house, so I will say intuitive, absolutely. They usually have a very strong sense. It's more on the feeling level, though of course it is going to depend on the planet, in the sign. Now, the planet's in 12th house because it is a very karmic house. And I will say, if there's a difference between it being the sun, being Jupiter, Mercury, any of the planets, and Saturn. Saturn and Pluto in the 12th house as chart rulers, it is a little bit different. If I see the chart ruler in the 12th house and it's Pluto, I also know that this person is here to learn lessons connected to, I'm going to say, power and abuse of power. And so Saturn in the 12th is I have to say, for the most part, it tends to be also a difficult position. They're here, there's a lesson connected to learning about control, not quite the same as the power, because this control is a little bit more about fear, all right? Because Saturn likes to be in control. It's about structure, right? Things that are tangible. It can touch it. It can feel it. It's concrete. And there it is in Neptune's house of, is it here? Is it there? I can't see through this fog. But going back again, chart rule in the 12th house, definitely intuition also tells me it's somebody who needs to recharge their batteries. They usually like their own company. And they need at times to get away from people. I'll say that's similar, the 4th and the 8th as well. I didn't mention that, but chart rule in the 4th, 8th, and 12th usually have a need, no matter how social even they may be, at times to sort of just kind of like say, leave me alone. And they're comfortable with their own company. Now, so this is just literally the tip of the iceberg. And so, but even just a quick analysis of the chart ruler, its planet, its sign, okay, its condition, if applicable, and its house placement can really yield so much information. And you haven't even begun to look at, excuse me, it's allergy season. You haven't even started to look at the aspects, right? Haven't even started to look and say, oh, is it conjunct something? Is it squaring? Is it sextiling? Is it quincunxing, right? Is it opposing? Is it trining? I know I missed one there, right? And so I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm just going to actually end this right here. But it's just something I really want you to think about, because certainly you can listen. You can take the process, and there's so much to be just looking at any one planet, quite frankly, and analyzing it by the nature of the planet, the energies, look at the sign, the house placement, the aspects, the house rulership. I mean, because really that's what comes down to analysis when we talk about an in-depth analysis. And, many of you know, because I've done this for you, that you can pick a planet, in a chart, and seriously, if there are numerous aspects, like I could go on for like an hour, really, just getting information, really, from that one planet. And I'm not saying that's what you should be doing or that you need to do, but consider that chart ruler. Because as I say, we all have our different styles. I just wanted to share mine with you, because certainly I analyze the whole chart, but that chart ruler to me, I have to say I guess I am going to say, for me, I feel in most cases that the chart ruler offers me the most insight in a way into the person, okay, into the individual. The rest of the chart will give me more insight maybe into the life lessons, right? What do they hear? The North Node, what does their soul come here? Oh, what is the past life, and gifts and talents. But if I'm really just looking at the individual for quick analysis, just going through those steps and the aspects, I'll be honest, because I'll look at the aspects as well, because any aspects, any connection that the chart ruler makes, right, to any planet in the chart has an influence on the person as an individual. So, and just to be a little clearer, if the chart ruler is Venus, I don't think I mentioned Venus, so let's say the chart ruler is Venus. Excuse me, it's Venus, and it's Venus in, let's say Venus in Libra, right? Let's put Venus in its own sign, one of its signs, and put Venus in Libra, all right? And it's lovely, and let's not make it intercepted or retrograde, and we can put it, in whatever house you want. The truth, it doesn't matter. But in terms of the aspects, right? And you think about Venus in Libra, it's sociable, right? It's sociable. It's peace-loving, right? It's got talent for, it cooperates. It's a social butterfly in many ways, right? Beautiful, appreciates beauty, all these lovely things. Okay, maybe a little bit, indecisive sometimes, but all these beautiful traits. And if Venus is connected by aspect to Pluto, all right, that Venus is getting a little bit of a Plutonian flavor. So if Venus is the chart ruler, that Venus in Libra, that's my individual, and I've got Pluto aspecting Venus, that Venus in Libra, it's not all light and airy. Even if it's a trine, it's still a little bit of this Plutonian energy. And the same thing again, if it's Saturn, same thing. It's going to have a little bit of that Saturn energy. Every planet, okay, that connects with that chart ruler has an influence on it. And so that planet to me represents, in this case, let's say you in the chart, every single one of those influences, it gets added into the layers of the personality. And so, again, just something for you to think about. And so just wanted to share that with you, because very often people, I do get asked, how do you interpret? How do you interpret? What is your, your system? And maybe someday I will have the time to really teach it. But the chart ruler, I do think, is underused, maybe underrated, underused. So if you do need a quick analysis sometimes, and you look at a chart, and, sometimes, listen, you look at a chart, especially with friends, and it's like someone says, oh, look at my chart, or you want to look at their chart. And sometimes you see things right away. You may not need to go to the chart ruler. Something just jumps out, right, and you spot it. But if you're ever looking at a chart and you're kind of a little bit stuck, okay, then by all means, go to that chart ruler and start there. So that wraps it up for today. And that's it. I do want to encourage you to sign up for my newsletter. I know everybody gets a lot of email, but it's comes out every other Sunday, right? Twice a month. And I do not send spam. And there's good content in there. And more important, that is where any announcements are made. Not to say that I won't announce some things maybe in the future, if I'm doing anything, on the air, like an event. But if you're on the newsletter, any type of events, because they are, they're going to be coming up this year. I hesitate to say that, but I'm actually making arrangements for space and things like that. So if you're on the newsletter, you're going to be the first one to know it. And any type of special pricing, you're only going to get that if you're on my newsletter. I mean, plain and simple, not even going to kid you about it. And, I don't, no. Anyway, not going to give any surprises away. If you're on the newsletter, you'll find out. Anyway, if you're not, hey, that's great too. But until next week, I'm Debra Ann Clement, and thank you for joining me, and may Jupiter's blessings be your constant companion.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation. To schedule a consultation, please visit DebraClementAstrologer.com.